Hello everybody, Tyler King here with a new episode of NuReview. Today I'm going to be doing a review of the sixth solo album by Peter Murphy, Dust. Dust is released on April 23rd, 2002 after a 7-year hiatus of releasing any albums. Cascade had been released in 1995, and two interesting things happened in 1998. The first was a EP that Peter Murphy released that saw a sorry, I'm looking for saw a melding of his previous more conventional rock kind of oriented music and gelled it with more electronic undertones. That was the Recall EP, which he recorded with Tim Skold and Sasha Konechko from the band KMFDM. But the bigger event that happened in 1998 for Peter Murphy was the first reunion of his old band Bauhaus with David J., Daniel Ash, and Kevin Haskins. This was a short-lived reunion. The band, for this reunion, because there was another one later, only lasted the lesser part of a year. And after that, Peter just spent a lot of time living in Turkey, which is where he still resides. And him living in Turkey and living in the Middle East really does inspire the sound of this new album. Here, Peter has pretty much all but abandoned the more straight ahead, commercial sounding songwriting approach that he had taken on his first handful of albums. And I know that I said that there are two distinct phases of Peter Murphy's musical career, and this one really does jumpstart what that second phase is going to be. Here Peter has implemented a lot of Middle Eastern instrumentation and songwriting into the songs to the point where most of the instrumentation here is played by native Turkish musicians. Peter does play keyboards on a couple of songs. He is giving programming credits on another, but for the most part, this just sees a lot of session musicians under Peter's direction for the entirety of this album. Interestingly enough, the last two songs here are reinterpretations of two previous songs of his. The first one being My Last 2 Weeks from the Love Hysteria album, and the second being Subway from the Cascade album, this one being called Subway Epilogue, as it does have an added verse to it at the end that isn't on the original version. Also, at 68 minutes long, this is to date the longest album by Peter Murphy. So let's dive right into it. This is Dust. The album opens with the song Things to Remember, and a very low humming sound opens up this song with Peter soon coming in, and for the first part of the song he's just talking. He's talking to us about things to remember when writing figures of speech and sound. Stringed instruments begin getting plucked and strummed, and we soon hear very low in the mix this driving, pounding beat that soon is about to propel the song forward. This atmosphere builds up. Peter is vocalizing this whole time until finally the beat just completely drops out. Peter says, "Love anything" twice, and then the beat just pounds back in and propels us forward into the rest of this song. Ominous synths come in as Peter sings, "Wasted, I cut myself down." Violin soon joins in, and one of the most noticeable things on this song, and also that can be said about the album as a whole, is just how strong Peter's voice really is. And I know that I said this about the Cascade album, with how far his voice had come going from the Holy Smoke album to Cascade, but jumping from Cascade to Dust, especially since none of the songs here really have a hook or what's what I'm looking for. or like memorable melodies that you can hum to. Really his voice is going to be the thing that grounds these songs into any kind of quote-unquote conventional Western popular music, and he really does the job here. Some more strings are plucked furiously before the 5-minute mark, and then some bass joins into the instrumentation. It all starts to calm down around the 6-minute mark. Peter utters the phrase, "These things are to be remembered," and the song finally comes to a close. And I really do think that this is a phenomenal song to open this album with, because it's familiar enough in its instrumentation, in the sense that there is a very steady, a very pounding, a very driving beat going through the song, that paired with Peter's vocals do ground it into this area of somewhat familiarity, but there is enough of the Eastern influence and instrumentation on this song that is going to become even more apparent as the rest of the album goes on. The second song is Fake Sparkle or Golden Dust, and at about 8.5 minutes long, this is one of the longest songs on the album. And something that I should say is that all of the songs here are incredibly long. Okay, maybe not incredibly long, but I think the shortest one here is around the 6-minute mark or so. So even though there's only less than 10 songs here, it's like I said, this is still his longest album to date. As of 2018, this is his longest album. And something about Fake Sparkle or Golden Dust, and this can also be attributed to a lot of the other songs on here, is that even though you may see the length of the track before listening to it, Peter really utilizes the running time of each of these songs to his advantage. The song opens up with what sounds like a cello being played, before that is replaced with more higher pitched stringed instruments. A simple cymbal comes in to help keep the tempo, and Peter's vocals here are even more passionate than they were on Things to Remember. The lyrics are a little bit more abstract, but I don't think that this song necessarily is about the lyricism. What I mean when I say that is that the center point isn't going to be what Peter is singing. The central point is going to be more of the mood that the song is trying to convey. We get samples that sound like snarls. We do get some more emotionless vocalization as the song goes on, and it really creates this very dark, unsettling atmosphere. There are some synths that do make an appearance around the 5-minute mark, but most of the instrumentation on here is going to be those stringed instruments. While I may not necessarily enjoy this song as much as the one immediately before or the one immediately after it, I do really enjoy this song. There's not really too much I can say about it that is any kind of critique, because despite the fact it's about 8.5 minutes in length, once the song ends, it doesn't feel like that amount of time has passed since the song started. The third song is No Home Without Its Sire, and this song is a little bit more electronic based than most of the other songs on this album, and admittedly it is probably my favorite one on here. Some synth pads open up the song and bring us in, as well as some sampled chants, which will make an appearance further on into the song. A saw synth and some, it sounds like finger cymbals, start keeping tempo before this very simple, steady beat comes in. Peter sings, "Break out the tomb, the self-made womb," and lines like that. I mean, this song has probably my favorite lyrics on this album. In the chorus, he sings, "And if you run from me, well, I'll be waiting in the driver's car," over this electronic chugging. Like most of the songs here, there isn't too much variation of the instrumentation over the running time of it, but I will say that this song does not feel as dark and bleak and atmospheric and claustrophobic as some of the other songs on here do. The bass line is really great. That really stands out to me on this song, as does the vocal melody and the vocals itself. At the end of the song, where all the instrumentation fades away and it just leaves Peter repeating that line from the chorus, "And if you run from me, well, I'll be waiting in the driver's car." It is such a perfect ending to this song, and it pretty much sends shivers down my spine every time that I'm listening to this song, because one of the things about this song, and I would say also things to remember, is that they really draw you in and they force you to listen to everything that is going on in this song. The fourth song is Just for Love, and this is one of the fastest songs on the album from a tempo perspective. A low dark keyboard and what sounds like a didgeridoo open up this song, accompanied soon by Peter's very atmospheric vocals. The vocals are lower, the lyrics are a little bit more abstract. Around a minute in, we do get this beat going on as various plucked instrumentation comes in. It's Peter singing, "You've never been so luminescent." The song reminds me of Fake Sparkle or Golden Dust in the sense that here, again, the lyrics are not the important factor in this song. It's really about the instrumentation. It's really about the mood that the song is trying to convey. I will say, though, that the lyrics here are not as strong as they were on Fake Sparkle or Golden Dust, and even though there is some very impressive violin playing around the 5-minute mark, there is not enough going on here to keep me as enthralled as I have been on the first few songs here. Up next is Girlchild Aglow, and funny enough, I'd say the first 10 seconds or so here make me think of a Tom Waits song. And this song has always struck me as, like, Peter just had a few different song ideas and he threw them all together and just decided to, like, see what would stick. And that's what this song is. The opening verse is delivered in the slow, multi-tracked vocal, Peter singing about this girl child who follows the lapping of the ocean. Just under a minute in, we do get this very nice harp playing, but suddenly this very inappropriate electronic burst of noise just comes out of nowhere. At first I thought that maybe my CD was scratched, but lo and behold, listening to this song on any streaming platform, on YouTube, wherever, this is how this song is. And it is so jarring and so out of place from everything else going on. Like, it literally sounds like you are listening to a song off of a scratch CD. Like, there's this constant electronic jumping and scratching noise going on, and it just completely takes me out of this song. There is some cool heavy distorted guitar playing between the verses, but with that horrible, annoying scratching noise going on, I just can't enjoy anything else going on in the song until it finally goes away around the 2-minute 45-second mark. And I know that I said that each song here is pretty long, and this one in particular is about 7 minutes long, and I really do not think that this is a song that is deserving of that runtime. Besides that shimmering guitar that comes in every now and then, there's not much going on here to keep my interest, and that horrible popping noise comes back in around the 5-minute mark, and it just does not leave, and it completely takes me out of this song. I think that it is wholly inappropriate from what is going on here, and I would get it if it matched the tempo that was going on in this song, but it doesn't. It just seems randomly thrown in. I don't know what the reasoning was, and for me, it just ruins this song. Following this, we have Your Face, which is arguably the most atmospheric song on this album, and I would say that if you haven't listened to this album or any of the songs from Dust, this one is probably the one that is most representative of the vibe and the feel and the atmosphere of what Peter and the musicians here are trying to accomplish on this record. I will also say that this seems to be the one song from this album that Peter plays with some amount of regularity. Granted, I've only seen him play it a couple of times, but this is really the only song from Dust that I've seen him play. And I will say that he plays it a lot more now that his current bassist, Emilio China, also is very skilled in playing the violin. Also, this is the longest song here. This is like right around the 9-minute mark. The song is opened by this very atmospheric violin, which soon this beat comes in, and the beat does sound a lot like a heartbeat. Some low hums and what sound like E-bowed guitars come in, and they create this very chilling atmosphere. And it isn't until the 2-minute mark or so that Peter finally does come in and start singing, and he sings Water Lily, Freedom, Where Does the Spirit Lay? And these keyboards very passionately breathe underneath him, and there's a sampled sound effect of lightning striking, and it is this very dramatic song. When it comes to songs on this album that do atmosphere correctly, this song is right up at the top. The lyrics, again, are very abstract, but the quality of the musicianship here really forces you to not necessarily pay attention to the words that Peter is singing and more of how he is singing it, and to rely more on this very somber mood that is being presented to you over the course of this song. And I know that I said this about No Home Without Its Sire, but having a 9-minute song where by the end of it you don't even really realize that you've been listening to it for 9 minutes is an accomplishment. And Peter and the musicians really do pull that off with this song. And I mean, it's always a treat to see Peter play this. The first time I saw him do this song, it was in 2012 at Club Nokia in Los Angeles, and him and his band had just done the Bauhaus version of Ziggy Stardust by David Bowie, and at the end, when Peter sings Ziggy played guitar, him and his guitarist at the time, Mark Thwaite, and his bassist Emilio, they all just kind of like fall to the ground. And I'm watching them, I'm just like, what the fuck's going on? And all of a sudden, just like out of nowhere, like Emilio, like just laying down, has got this violin, and he starts playing the violin while laying down. And Peter starts singing this song while laying down, and it was this very emotional moment, and it's a privilege seeing Peter doing this song. Following Your Face, we have Jungle Haze, and some very shimmering synth movements open up the song before some very pretty synth pads come in, and they kind of beckon us into this very hazy musical landscape. Peter's vocals this time around are more baritone, they are deeper, and they do mesh very well with the hazy instrumentation that's going on. And the chorus's lyrics are very sincere, very passionate here. Peter's singing, "Where is love in that jungle haze? You're building temples made with sand. Leave your city, leave your dream, let the silence sway." The violin work on here also is incredibly impressive, especially paired with coming right off of the back of Your Face. I feel almost like this song could have been and should have been the final song on here, especially like The ending of this song is so appropriate to what could be the ending of an album, where this like violin surges forward and it's this very dramatic moment at the end of this song, and it almost feels like the versions of My Last 2 Weeks and Subway are tacked on here as afterthoughts, because I really feel like Jungle Haze should be the final song on this album. And I don't necessarily think that it's a matter of running time, because even with those two songs off of this album, you still have something like a 45, 50-minute long record. But that wasn't to be. And up next, we have the re-recorded version of My Last 2 Weeks. And what was arguably one of, if not the best songs on Love Hysteria, here is now one of the worst songs, due in part to the popping effects that were on Girlchild Aglow making a reappearance here. Eschewing the lusciousness of the original version of the song, or even something like Jungle Haze or Your Face, this song is more bare bones. It focuses more on plucked instrumentation than any kind of lush musical soundscape. Peter's vocals here are almost unnecessarily overdramatic, to the point where in times it feels almost like self-parody. Between the two new versions of the older songs on this record, I will say that this one is definitely the worst of the two, and it's one of my least favorite songs here on this album. The album closes with Subway Epilogue, and I think that this song does work better as a re-recording than the version of My Last 2 Weeks, because on the album Cascade, the song Subway was arguably the most dust-sounding song on that album. Like My Last 2 Weeks, it does appear as a more stripped-down version from the original, but there is this rhythmic pounding beat throughout the song that helps to ground it a bit more than the re-recorded version of My Last 2 Weeks. The instrumental swelling during the refrain of "There's a Place Where We Can Meet" is a very powerful, beautiful moment on this song, and I do think that this re-recording, it does work. The main draw here, and the reason why Epilogue is tacked onto the title here, is there is an added verse at the end of this song, now ending with Peter singing, "There's a place where we will meet," instead of "There's a place where we can meet." Now, even though I do think that this re-recording works a lot more than the previous one that precedes it on the track listing, I don't think that it's necessarily an appropriate closer for the album, like Jungle Haze is. And again, it's not that it's a bad song, I just don't see it as a fitting closer, especially considering that it had made its first appearance on the album directly preceding this one. And I feel like a quote-unquote original song done for this album should have closed this album. And that, my friends, is Dust by Peter Murphy. Dust by Peter Murphy, I think, is a very interesting album in his discography. And like I said when I was talking about Cascade, this really does start the second phase of Peter's solo output. You really can draw a line between his first 5 albums, Should the World Fail to Fall Apart, to Love Hysteria, to Deep, to Holy Smoke, to Cascade, and then all of a sudden, after the 7-year hiatus, here is Dust, which is this whole new thing. And I can see where the complaint comes that it is alienating to some fans, because after such a long period of time, all of a sudden Peter returns with something that isn't following the same trajectory of the albums that came before it, and instead he is starting in this whole new direction. When I talked about the Love Hysteria album, I did make a mention that the song Socrates the Python was more reminiscent of anything from the first 5 albums that he would end up doing here on Dust, and I do think that that definitely holds true. And Peter always had, for sure, an interest in this Middle Eastern music, this instrumentation, uh, just, this whole package. The other thing is I can definitely see the complaint about how this album can be seen as a fetishization of the music of the Middle East. And at this point, Peter had been living in Turkey for 20 some odd years. And it would be the same thing as if, somebody from Turkey moved to England or moved to America, a musician, and then ended up making an album that was more reminiscent of Western music. So I really more see this album as kind of a love letter to this music that Peter is surrounded with in his place of living. I don't... Okay. So here was something that I talked about a little bit when I did a review of the last Gary Numan album, Savage, Songs from a Broken World. And that was that it really bothers me when people say that they are going to make an album that is Eastern influenced or inspired by the music of the Middle East. And what they mean by that is there's maybe 1 or 2 songs that happen to have a oud on them, or like a sitar on 1 or 2 songs, or like I sampled what sounds like a religious chant, and so I put that on 1 or 2 songs, and that means that all of a sudden my album is now inspired by the Middle East. It's the same thing as, like, when Adam and the Ants came out with the Prince Charming album. It's the same thing as if Adam Ant said something like, oh, well, I was inspired by rap music on this album just because Ant Rap happens to be on it. The other thing is that, like, I can't really remember if there was ever any announcement by Peter where he said, like, oh, here's my new album, and it just so happens to be heavily influenced by the music of where I live. He was just kind of like, hey, here's the album, and just listen to it. Like, here it is. And he made the album that he wanted to make and made no apologies for it, for whether it alienated people or not. And I mean, I am all for this album. I'd say that this is probably his most fully realized album from a conceptual standpoint, in that all of the songs really do flow well together. There are a couple of songs here that I am not super duper crazy about, but for the most part, I can listen to this album from front to back and enjoy the entire thing as a whole, regardless of the couple of songs that I'm not necessarily a big fan of. At the end of the day, I don't really think that Peter has exploited any kind of culture. I don't think he's exploited any kind of music here. And it's honestly, in my eyes, listening to it, I don't think it is that radical of a departure for him. What I mean when I say that is that there was always this more ethereal, there was always this more esoteric side of him on these previous albums. Songs like Neverman, songs like Socrates the Python, songs like the original version of My Last 2 Weeks, and of course there were also the more radio-friendly songs, A Strange Kind of Love, Cuts You Up, Hit Song, and I mean, the funny thing is that I would be hard-pressed on Dust to find any song that you could look at it and be like, this is the single. But it was like I said, talking about it earlier in the review, there's not any memorable hooks. There's no melodies where you're like, oh yeah, that's a great tune. It is such a mood-invoking album, and it's probably, as a whole, I would say his darkest album. Uh, yeah, I really enjoy this album, and while I don't necessarily think it's his strongest record, I do think that it holds up very well in his discography. I really enjoy it, and I think that him and all of the musicians that he got on it, and the producer that was on here, really created a record to be proud of. And it is definitely a violent departure from what he had been doing up until this point, but I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. And so, favorite songs on this album, it would definitely be let me see, definitely be Things to Remember, No Home Without Its Sire, and I would say Your Face. Least favorite song here, I mean, in case you couldn't tell, I'm not a really big fan of Girlchild Aglow. I would say Girlchild Aglow, My Last 2 Weeks, and probably Just for Love. Yeah, those three to me are going to be the three that I come back to the least often. Girlchild Aglow in My Last 2 Weeks being because of the poppy skippy bits. And Just for Love, I mean, besides the fact that there was a whole tour named after this song, so obviously Peter must enjoy it, I I don't really remember it too well in comparison to the other songs on the album. So that is Dust. If I were to give this album a rating, I would probably rate it just as highly as I did with Cascade. So that would be a 7 out of 10. I really do think that this is an album to come back to over and over again. And it's an album that the more you listen to it, the more you do hear these very subtle nuances and pieces of this music and these songs that might have not stuck out to you the first time that you heard them. And if you haven't heard this album, I would definitely say go out and listen to it. If you have heard this album but haven't listened in a while, I definitely do think that it's worth re-listening to. Don't go into it expecting the same kind of material from his first 5 albums. I would say go in with an open mind, especially if you are not necessarily used to dealing with albums or pieces of music that have more of a Middle Eastern flavor to them. But I would definitely say go in with an open mind and just let it wash over you. And that is my review of Dust. So what do you think? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you agree with my rating? Do you disagree with my rating? Is your favorite song Girlchild Aglow? Is your least favorite song No Home Without Its Sire? Please leave any and all comments in the comment box below. I will be putting up my review of his next album next. And until then, I am Tyler King with NuReview. Dust by Peter Murphy. Let me get this out of the case, actually, because I really do like this album. Dust by Peter Murphy. That is a very solid and strong 7 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.